Okay, so I have put down pattern paper on all of my places. So all of the big places, got that 6 by 6. And then the places with the pocket, I got those matted. And then that freestanding pocket also got matted as well. Now, we already made our tags and our inserts, right? So the tags go into the pockets, sort of the small pockets, and because we have the paper bags, we have this opening sort of between here, this sort of pocket from the bag itself, and we can slip our tag in there. Now, I guess technically you could actually put 2 tags in here. There's sort of space. But I will tell you, by the time you get all the pattern paper on here, this is actually starting to bulk up a little bit. So now if people are going to put, pictures in here, you're going to add more. So I think 1 is fine. You can see the little scallop borders of them hanging out of the side of the pages, and all of our tags I put just a little bit of ribbon on so you can kind of see those. Now, remember I said put your cover on, but on that inside sheet, don't put your pattern paper. Well, as soon as I turned off the camera, I totally forgot and put that piece of pattern paper on. But that's okay. Let me show you sort of how to fix that if you can. So let's pretend like I did that on purpose. 1 second here. Okay. So I have these brads, and that's what's going to be our closure. These are actually antique brads from Stampin' Up. And we want to put 1 here. I have a Fisker's hole punch that has kind of a small hole. So I'm going to figure out kind of where I want this to go. Now eventually this is going to be our closure. We haven't worked on it yet, but eventually it's sort of going to close. So I can kind of get an idea, giving it a little space. So I kind of want my brad, let's say right about here. Yeah, that seems about right. Actually, I can't even get that far with my hole punch. Let me put a little mark. Where I think I want it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I have a piece of fun foam. Let me just make sure that's sort of centered. It's a little high. Let's put it right here. Oh, 6 1/4 right there. Okay. Sort of right at the edge there. All right. All right, let me take a little pokey tool and poke through. And give it a little wiggle. And I'll do it on the other side too. Okay. So I'm going to put my brad through here. Now, because we're going to wrap a wire around it, or some string, you don't want to like squish it, really hard against here. Give it just a little wiggle room. So I'm going to put a paper clip under here, and just so it has a little wiggle. Okay. Now let's put a little dot of glue there. Now to cover this up, get the same kind of coordinating paper, and a 1-inch hole punch. And if you can cut out the same area, where you're going to cover up, you can camouflage it. So I really want kind of this area right here. So let me see how close I can get. I kind of want most of that yellow flower. And I think that's good. And then I'll take some glue and kind of put it around the edge there. And then just kind of line that up if I can. Oh, I did a pretty good job. And this takes a little wiggle. You got to kind of push the sides down. It may help to use a ball stylus. Let's see if I have one here. Like a small ball stylus. So you can kind of push down around. But if you can line that pattern up, pretty good. It almost becomes kind of invisible there. So that's a good way to cover it up. Okay. All right, that puts our brad there with a little tiny bit of wiggle room. All right, now we have 2 more things to do. One is to work on the flap, and the other is to do the binding. Now, the flap, we're going to use this piece of pattern paper that we cut out. That was 6 5 1/4. And it's going to sort of wrap, let's see here. Well, I wanted it to... I didn't really intend to use... I wanted to use this, but I think I cut it the wrong way. I don't really want the words to be that way when it's closed. I really wanted them that way. Okay. Yeah, let me cut a different piece of paper, I think, actually. And actually, you know what? I may change my mind. I may use a solid piece of paper. Okay. So this is going to sort of wrap around our book binding here. But before we do that, I actually want to fold this a little bit to make my edge kind of sturdier. So what I'd like to do is since this is 5 1/4, I'd like to make it about a total length of 2 1/2. So I want to fold it kind of right there. And this doesn't need to be all that precise. And if you wanted it that big, you could leave it that big if you want. Okay, so let me glue this little flap down that I just made. And then we're going to glue this solid piece here. and just line it up with the edge of that flap. And this actually has a little bit of an overhang of the flap itself. I'm just sort of centering it there. And then we're just going to wrap it around. Okay, now you can see mine is a little long, so you might want to, so you may need to trim it a little bit. I need to trim off just 1/4 of an inch. Okay, now we're eventually going to sort of manipulate this to fold a little bit, but I want to give the glue kind of a little bit of a chance to dry. So we'll go on to the binding, and all we're doing here is using that piece of other solid color and the Tyvek. The Tyvek's the really strong kind of fabric. I mean, paper, well, it's sort of almost like a combination of paper and fabric. So I'm going to put that Tyvek just center it in my solid piece of paper there. And then here's where I said having something to give something a curve is helpful. If you can give this a little bit of a natural curved shape to it, it is helpful. So I'm just rolling it around a knitting needle, actually. Okay. Now I'm going to sort of center it by eye. Just looking down, just sort of. And we're only going to put glue on the front and the back here. We're not going to put glue in the middle. So once I have it sort of where I think it should be, and then do the same on the back. And do the front first, because there is the possibility of having some unevenness, because you have the paper bag and there's some thicknesses in there. And so if you do have some unevenness here on this binding, it's better to do it sort of on the back where you can't really see it as much. And you certainly could try to make sure it's even. See, I don't know if you can tell, but the top here is a little bit not as wide as the bottom, and that's because of the sort of thickness of the book. But on the front, having it nice and even is sort of the better thing. Then you can, doesn't really matter. And I like having, now you could obviously do this in a piece of pattern paper, same with this, but I like sort of since I had this busy pattern, I like having a solid one. Now once you put that in place, you want to give it some time to dry, so don't go kind of opening and closing things. Same thing here, now that we've given this a little bit time to dry with the glue. I'm going to take my knitting needle and try to give kind of a curve. Okay. And then once we have that, you can kind of shape it with your hand a little bit too. Now, if this bugs you, so the front here is a little bit short. I could have made it, longer, just to match up with the top here and the bottom. And certainly I could have just glued those together. It's okay for me right now, though. So, okay. So we're going to do the same thing with our brad. I'm just going to sort of mark where I want it. And this one I think I'll be able to use my hole punch. And then I have just some hemp twine and some beads that I put on there. And for length, you can sort of measure the length. I don't like to have it dangle too far, so you can kind of wrap this around a couple times here to get your length. So I really want it about right there. And I'm going to tie this in a knot, kind of, so that it doesn't ever kind of fall off there. You know what I mean? It just sort of stays. And then to close it, you would just wrap it around a few times and let it sort of hang there. So, okay, that's it, I think. Now, this is just putting the journal together. You can obviously do a ton of embellishment kinds of things. You can stamp stuff, put in three-dimensional things. Now, I will say, because this doesn't have a binding system, they're all right up against each other, it's not going to do well with putting lots of three-dimensional things in here. But you could obviously put, do some stamping and add some flat embellishments. If you have some of your flat pieces, your leftover pieces, what you could do is actually create, let's see here, if I have any, maybe I don't have any that are that long. Okay, so this is just a scrap piece, right? I could actually put this on the bottom here and put glue along just the three sides so that you can have a place that you can just slide things in then. So you can do lots of little tiny pockets like that. And I think they'll work better on the stationary ones. And they might be okay on the flaps. I mean, as long as they hold stuff in place. You could do things like that. Let me show you this one. Now this is really kind of totally stolen from May Made It. She had this, she has this stamp set, which I eventually got. I didn't have at the time that I made this, but she has this stamp set that has a little Polaroid stamp in it. And she also has this other one called Place Photo Here. And what she did was just cut out little white pieces of paper, stamp this frame on those, and then stamp Place Photo Here kind of in the middle of it, which was a great idea. And then she kind of put them in the album itself. Now, I didn't have that stamp when I did this one, but what I did have was a die that actually cut out a little, like, Polaroid kind of frame. So what I did was put them in there, but I left the tops just open. So the idea is when somebody has a picture, like they kind of know where the photos go. So if you have a picture, you can just slide it. I mean, obviously you have to cut it to the right size, but you can just sort of slide it in place and you don't need any like glue or anything like that. It just sort of slides there. So that's a really cool kind of thing you could do. This was a little bit more complicated because it's a die cut, so I obviously had to cut out a ton of dies. What she had done was just cut, white pieces of paper that were this big and stamped those things on there and then glued those pieces of paper in place here. So, and you could cut out different kinds of journaling places. I also have a tiny little one of the photos, so I did the same for this one on the tags if they wanted to do really small photos. And then some places I just put some blank paper so you could write like a date and a time and whatever you wanted to write in there. Again, there's not a whole lot of space in these kind of journals for three-dimensional things. But you can put little kind of embellishments on it here. And then this one has a magnet closure, so that's an option too. I just put a magnet underneath there and one in here, and just so it closes like that. This one I also did some beads just kind of on the binding here, just as a decoration. They're not really functional in any way, but they kind of look very cool. And then obviously you can put a title on it, or something, whatever the season is, the holiday, or whatever the album's for. So that's it. Comments, questions, leave them below. I'm certainly not an expert in these. I've only made a couple of them now, but they're a little bit of obsessive now that I've made them. They're really fun to make. And when you're putting them together, like, they feel like they're kind of going to be messy and not look great, but then once you get, all of the pattern paper in place here, it looks really great. And there's a ton of space in here to put things. I think if I counted, I think there's like, oh, I forget, I don't want to say, I can't remember, but there's a lot of places, obviously, to put photos, to use the tags to put either photos or journaling. There's, these places you can pull these out of. This particular pattern paper had this, kind of cool little things in it. So I cut a couple of those out with images and some statements in there. But just tons of space in here to put photos. It doesn't look that big, but there's a lot of places to do stuff in here. So that's it. Okay. Thanks for watching. I hope this video was okay. I know it's one big video, but I hopefully divided it up into sections so that it felt more manageable. And that's it. Talk to you all later. Bye.